Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Wlodkowski, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right, well, here we are with another episode of this podcast, which takes us into the work lives of many accessibility practitioners. And today I am pleased to be speaking with Tom Wlodkowski. Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Doing well, Joe. How about yourself?
I'm good. It's a nice summer day in Vashon Island, which is near Blink's Seattle headquarters office. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm at Comcast's corporate headquarters in Philadelphia, and it's a nice typical summer July day here. A little bit of humidity, but the temperatures in the upper 80s, and I'm a big fan of summer, so I'm all in on this type of weather for sure.
All right. Well, it's great to have you here. I've always enjoyed my visits to Philadelphia. In this podcast, one of the things that we do is find out about, what things you're involved in and how you got to where you are today. So maybe you could start out just talking about a little bit about your current position and what that entails.
So I have the pleasure of leading the accessibility program here at Comcast. And our goal is to really ensure that disability inclusion is a part of everything we do in terms of how we design and develop products, whether they be employee facing or customer facing. Now, of course, any one of us in the accessibility space will tell each other and anyone who wants to know that accessibility is a journey, right? There isn't a destination. And so it continues to evolve as technology evolves, as new businesses come into the fold. We're just, really now this year leaning in pretty deeply on our employee experience side. We got started focusing on our customer-facing products, largely our entertainment products, and obviously that has expanded over time as well. And so accessibility at Comcast is really founded on three fundamental pillars, if you will. Customer and stakeholder engagement would be one pillar. Product capabilities would be the second pillar, and then the infrastructure necessary to support our commitment is that third pillar. And various people on my team are on the hook for different aspects of each one of those pillars that I described. Now, we don't own products per se. There may be one product, our adaptive web remote application, which we can talk about in a moment, that we do oversee directly. But everything else we do is, like most accessibility groups at large companies, in support of various product and business units across the organization. So we're there to define requirements, and we are there as consultants and do some testing and all of that. So, but when we think about like customer and stakeholder engagement, it's really based on the nothing about us without us statement that we hear from the civil rights space. And we can't build our products in a vacuum. We need to deliver products and design products with accessibility in mind. And the best way to do that is to talk to the end user. And so I have somebody on my team who manages our engagement work, and they'll do everything from helping us, provide people for focus groups for our research team that we have in our experience design organization that helps us. They'll put together roundtables. They help us. This person, Joel, identifies specific types of partnerships that we might want to establish, and then oversees the creation of the relationship. And so, for example, today we have a very nice partnership with the Team Gleason Foundation. Team Gleason was founded by Steve Gleason, the retired NFL New Orleans Saints player, who, after he retired, was diagnosed with ALS. And the foundation's mission is, until there's a cure for ALS, technology is the cure. And as we talked about, we have this web remote experience that allows someone with ALS or other disabilities to bring whatever assistive technology they have that works best for them, as long as they can use it to browse the web or navigate the digital world. Bring that technology to our doorstep and essentially have a web experience that allows them to independently control their TV viewing experience. And so Joel on my team would create that type of a partnership, because we have this product that we developed for a number of reasons, and we want to make it better, but also we want to get the word out and drive traffic. So that's kind of engagement, and we do that, and he does that on the same side of the employee awareness piece. Like, we need to keep accessibility top of mind with our employees. And so Joel is very involved in our Global Accessibility Awareness Day activities in May. Certainly works with our My Abilities employee resource group, and works on things for National Disability Awareness, National Disability Employment Awareness Month in October, et cetera. And so that's engagement. Product capabilities kind of speak for themselves once I tell you the types of products that we have. So of course, making sure that whatever mobile applications we have in the app stores are as inclusive as we can make them at any given time. And that's supporting the product groups and helping them with testing or requirements, et cetera. Same thing with web experiences, right? Web content accessibility guidelines 2.1 and AA conformance criteria is our target. But then on the other side of product capabilities, we put out a lot of hardware, cable set-top boxes. We're now partnered with Hisense to manufacture the X-Class Smart TV. It's a TV that has a 43 or a 50-inch model. It's available today in Walmart. And so, of course, we have to make that TV as inclusive as we can, right? And again, it's a journey. So what we launched with today, the first generation of that product, we're going to evolve that over time, right? So that's a built-in piece. Same thing with set-top boxes. Soon we're going to be talking about a new large button remote control that we have for people with dexterity challenges or visual impairments. And so I think you can see there the product capability side of the house. We were the first in our industry to launch an accessible set-top box interface for the blind. We have a talking guide that we call Voice Guidance, and that feature, the Voice Guidance feature, allows someone like myself who is blind to navigate the X1 and Flex user interface. So, navigating the electronic program guide to pick what you want to watch on TV, navigating our video on demand library, et cetera, setting and playing back a DVR recording. So that just kind of gives you an example. And then the third piece, and then I'll be quiet and let you get a word in edgewise on your own podcast, is infrastructure. And so what are the tools that our developers need to be able to deliver on Comcast's commitment to building inclusive products and experiences for both employees and customers? The requirements, design patterns. I have a small design team within my organization that helps us there on that front. We have a lab, really more of a showcase suite on our innovation floor that we can bring employees and outside guests into and show them the types of technologies that individuals with disabilities use, but also our products. And we can bring people in and work on projects and say, okay, hey, here's a new product. How do we want to go make this inclusive? So that really gives you a pretty broad overview. It's obviously there are more things than that, but in general, those are the the three pillars and examples of how those pillars work.
Well, I really appreciate that glimpse into what appears to be very comprehensive and a robust approach to accessibility at Comcast. And I think I want to maybe check in with a couple of those items in more detail a little bit later. One of the things with this program also is to learn how people have found their way into embracing accessibility as a profession. And so maybe you could share with us, kind of go back in time and, where your lived life, your work life first started having experiences that led you on the path to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm the youngest of four boys. I was born blind. The rest of my brothers are sighted. Grew up in Southington, Connecticut. So basically a suburban community. Was mainstreamed through public schools, went on to major in communications at Boston College. Along the way, did things that kids do, played drums in the marching band, had a rock band on the side, still play drums today. Also saxophone. So there's some music background there. Pretty normal childhood, I would say. Obviously, being mainstreamed through public schools, had vision teachers come in from the state of Connecticut Board of Education Services for the Blind to teach Braille skills, orientation and mobility, all of that. So that's the quick 5-second version of kind of, the child years. But then in Boston College, majored in communications, thought I was going to do a career in radio, and actually started out worked for a radio reading service in Connecticut, and then for a brief period at a news talk station in Hartford. WPOP was a news talk station at the time. I believe it's a sports station now. And kind of worked as a network producer for a statewide news network that we had. And, having gone to school in Boston, I really, and this is before the days of Uber, et cetera, really saw the independence that I was able to have in a different way in Boston than I was where I grew up. And where I grew up, you had to drive everywhere, right? In Boston, I could jump on the T and pretty much get anywhere I wanted, or taxis were certainly more plentiful at the time. Again, predating Uber and Lyft and rideshare as a practice. And so in going back to Boston, trying to find a radio gig, one of the folks in my network, a friend of mine, says, "Hey, have you heard of this service called Descriptive Video Service?" And I hadn't heard of it. And I said, "No, what's that?" And they said, "Well, they make television and movies accessible to the blind by inserting narrated description into the natural pauses of the program dialogue. And they're pioneering this at WGBH, which is the public broadcaster in Boston." They said, "You might want to go, check it out. Maybe there's something there for you too." So I, got connected to the executive director of that organization at the time, who just happened to be a fellow alum of Boston College. And so a 30-minute informational interview ended up turning into an hour-long conversation. And then all of a sudden, job openings were discussed, and threw my hat in the ring and was fortunate enough to get a job at Descriptive Video Service as an outreach coordinator. And that's the beginning of my accessibility career. Kind of put radio to the side at that point, and started working on the Descriptive Video Service efforts as an outreach coordinator. Went from there to another R&D group within the same media access group at WGBH, co-authored guidelines under federal grants for educational multimedia and how to make that accessible. Led a federal grant on making set-top boxes accessible. Who knew that so many years later I'd actually be making a set-top box accessible for a large cable company? So things kind of went full circle. At that R&D group, we had a business partner program. And so we would offer accessibility consulting services to corporations and the consulting fees would be turned back in to help fund our R&D efforts to make, next gen multimedia and other media services accessible. And so I was tapped to manage the consulting relationship that we had with America Online at the time, AOL. And then AOL was looking for a full-time accessibility director. And fortunately, through having been their consultant on accessibility, I was tapped to be their second director of accessibility. Stayed there for 10 years, did some interesting work at AOL. And then in 2012, again, through my network, so this really speaks to the value of networking, I learned about the Comcast job, and I've been here just over 10 years, and it's been a fun ride ever since.
Well, let's, going back to the work, let's see, you before AOL, you went from working with the, it was WGBH, I believe you said, and then
That's correct.
Was AOL after that. So I think around that time, that was probably the time that the W3C WCAG things were first coming out. I think a lot, to me, that's when I got involved. That's when I think a lot of things started happening in terms of making accessible technology more mainstream. Was that something you were, aware of when you were involved in the work with radio and going into AOL, or was it something that came about as you got involved in the tech industry?
And once I went to WGBH, I started working in their media access group. So radio was kind of not the focal point. And so absolutely we were aware and was even involved in some of the W3C work. I can remember several CSUN conferences sitting in on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, when Greg Vanderheiden and Wendy Chisholm were co-chairs of the initial set of guidelines. Judy Brewer, of course, that the W3C was based at MIT, and so Judy Brewer was from Massachusetts, and obviously WGBH being in Massachusetts, got to know Judy pretty well, actually knew her in her prior role to the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative. And so, we were definitely involved in that work. Some folks at GBH more than I was kind of more on the outreach side at the time, and then writing guidelines and consulting, but certainly was very involved at points. Worked, you mentioned you had John Gunderson on the podcast, and certainly worked with him. John chaired the user agent guidelines back in the day, and so I was involved in that. At AOL, worked with people like Rich Schwartfeger and others. We've when Rich and the team were leading the accessible rich internet application ARIA work. We founded a group that AOL sponsored that was called the DHTML Style Guide, and we were looking at, okay, you can make these widgets accessible, but we got to define the keyboard behavior for how should a tree view perform on the web, and we were trying to align what the types of widgets we were seeing appear on the web. We were trying to align the keyboard interaction behavior with what was kind of commonplace in the desktop environment. So certainly, definitely touched W3C activities in many different ways, either hosted events, sat in guidelines meetings, the DHTML style group at AOL. We also founded something called the Internet Caption Forum, which really was trying to bring a lot of the internet companies together, the Yahoos and Googles and AOLs and folks like that, and even some traditional media companies to say, hey, how do we really make captions work on the internet? And SMPTE time text was a result of some of that efforts. And, now today we have WebVTT and TTML and some of these other text formats for, SRT files for rendering, closed captions and things like that. So I've been involved in in one way or another, either as a, bystander or active participant in many of these areas.
Oh, well, it's really interesting to hear you talking about that. Boston was so much at the nexus of early web codification. If maybe people aren't familiar with all that went on there, especially as Tim Berners-Lee began to lead efforts and then you also mentioned Rich Schurtzberger, who I had interviewed for this. His episode hasn't been released yet, but all of his work with ARIA was, really a lot of amazing work that went on at that point. So it sounds like you had some communication there. And did that come into your work at AOL?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Rich is a good friend, and a lot of the folks in the field are, we root for each other. We work together. I think accessibility is a very collegial space to work in. Even if, people work for competing companies, we root for each other, and we leverage each other's success to drive, disability inclusion forward within our own organizations. So absolutely, we're bringing that into AOL, brought it into Comcast, just like everyone else has brought it into, whatever they're doing in the accessibility space in terms of digital accessibility. So, the WCAG really does serve as the benchmark for the various international regulations that have, web accessibility as a component, right? Section 508 references back to it. A lot of the European policies around accessibility, kind of reference back to the WCAG and some of these other guidelines. So, yeah, it was a fun time to be part of that, and I was trying to do my part, and hopefully I've been able to contribute in some way.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you about community working together. You mentioned CSUN, and that's certainly a wonderful event to attend and be able to learn new things and meet a lot of people. I was at the I'd missed a couple of years, but I was at the most recent one that was in Anaheim, and it was good to be able to get back and be with people again. So it sounds like you were, for a lot of this time, you were also able to be involved in the community and getting involved at conferences and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question about it.
And so then, it was probably a whirlwind of things going on at AOL and then into your work at Comcast. When I reflect on things that I've seen change in the past 20 years, there's some things that I think are amazing, like the amount of knowledge and technology that's been developed about accessibility is really incredible. On the other hand, if I think back to 1998 and first working on it, I kind of thought certain things would have been farther along than they are 22 years later. So I'm just wondering if you have any perspectives on that, starting at, WPOP, all the way up till today. Are there some things that you're surprised have gotten to where they are today, or maybe challenges that you still think we need to be concerned about?
We always need to be concerned, right? I don't think an accessibility professional's work is ever done, because there's always going to be a new technology. Now we're talking about, XR accessibility, VR, AR, and I know some really good people, are thinking about that, and hopefully I'll get a chance to get more connected to that over time. I got my hands full here, and but I think we're going to start to see that that effort become more pervasive. And so the accessibility professionals work is never done. And even stuff that's more commonplace, like how to make a website accessible or how to build an accessible mobile app, we need greater consistency in delivery of that, right? And that's why I said at the top that accessibility really is a journey, it's not a destination. And I think every one of us working in large companies would tell you that it takes time. I think the good news is that I think we're really at a at a turning point. And I think we've been saying this now for maybe a little bit over a year. Certainly the pandemic may have had some, slowing effect on it. Of course, we all want things to be further along, right? And we know that there are many gaps. But if you think about the number of companies that are focusing on accessibility now, of course, we would love more. But I think we have to take a step back and say, those of us who have been in this field, even before it was really able to be considered a field, have had impact. And the advocates and the consumers have certainly, and government officials, everyone has got their thumbprint on some aspect of this, right? I would say that the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act played a big role in bringing a lot of the telecom companies to the table in ways that perhaps they hadn't been before. We start to see, financial and pharmaceutical and insurance and, all sorts of other industries, really leaning in. And I think what's also helping this move forward is, companies can't find enough talent to do the work that needs to get done. And we both know, Joe, that people with disabilities are a vastly untapped talent pool. And, that's of course going to play a role, because you got to make the employee experience, the tools that people need to do their work accessible. So yes, it's taken longer than perhaps any of us would have hoped. But I think we have to take a step back and look at it and say, we are definitely making progress. And I think one of the challenges is, the disability community, is a fragmented community. My needs as a blind user are different than someone who is deaf versus someone with a physical disability. And so we don't often find the disability community speaking with one collective voice like we do within other diverse communities. And so, that takes a while too, to kind of get companies to figure out how to and other organizations, obviously we've seen challenges in academia as well. But I think, much brighter days are ahead, and I think we should hopefully start to see more acceleration now. So I would like to think, 5 years from now, we'll be much further along from where we are today than, say, where we are today to 5 years ago. But I think, if I look even in my own industry, when I started at Comcast in June of 2012, there weren't a lot of, traditional cable companies in the space. We didn't have a Prime Video. Netflix was probably still shipping DVDs as the majority of their business. Smart TVs hadn't come into real popularity the way they are today. And a lot of those devices now have accessibility built in, right, to some degree or another. So yes, we want progress to be faster, but I think if you start to look back over, the past, decade plus, you can see where advocates, government, and industry have all had a positive impact on driving disability inclusion forward. And I think tying it more effectively to very active DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts will also help move this forward. And there's work to be done there for sure.
Well, I certainly agree that a lot has accelerated in the past few years. I see that with job listings and opportunities for people in accessibility. One of the things that you mentioned is something that has come up in this podcast a few times, and that's related to having people with disabilities involved in the accessibility design and development process. And right at the beginning, you mentioned the mantra about
Nothing about us without us.
nothing about us without us. And unfortunately, I think in a lot of organizations, the infrastructure isn't there for people with abilities to be able to compete and have the same work tools that are available to others in the organization. And personally, I see that as as a real blocker and impediment that we need to be able to solve. I think culturally, how things are promoted within an organization is important. Just the fact that you have a title of vice president of accessibility, I think that's a strong indicator that there's a culture from the higher levels of the organization about accessibility. But I really do think that there needs to be more opportunities, equitable opportunities for everyone to be able to participate in this professional practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think organizations like IAAP have certainly played a big role. Obviously, we talked a lot about the Web Accessibility Initiative. I think we see a lot of disability organizations doing some great work. I'm on the board of Disability In, a B2B organization, and they're bringing companies together. We have the Valuable 500. Caroline Casey and team doing work, so I think we're, and there are many other organizations that are doing work. It's always dangerous when somebody in my role starts to try and mention organizations, because inevitably I'm going to leave somebody out and not make someone happy. So, if I didn't mention your organization, certainly, value the work that you're doing. The Consumer Technology Association. I'm on the board of the Consumer Technology Association Foundation. They're doing some great work and helping get nonprofits connected to technology, fostering opportunities for innovation. So I think we have a lot more visibility on this area than we've had, probably when you and I started this in the early to mid 90s. Yeah, and we still know that there's a far too high unemployment rate of individuals with disabilities, and there's work to be done. I think an organization like teachaccess.org and starting to bring accessibility into computer science curriculum, or digital accessibility into computer science curriculum, is great. Comcast isn't part of that yet, but that's something that I hope to be able to make happen over time. So I think we see a lot of different areas of focus, all driving toward that same goal. And you're right, we need more individuals with disabilities in the workplace, helping folks who are designing their experiences, whether it be digital or otherwise, physical, et cetera, to really offer that guidance. And so, I agree. I think there's, we need more opportunities. I don't have the, the answer completely, but I just know that we got to keep working at it.
Well, I think as you mentioned, there's a lot of good optimism to be having about things as we move into the future. And this has been, I think we've covered quite a lot in the time for this podcast. And I appreciate all of your insights and historical background about things. And I want to thank you for being part of this, and look forward to hopefully meeting you at in the future at a accessible event.
Likewise, Joe. Thanks for the opportunity. Keep up the great work with the podcast, and we'll see you down the road.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tom.